Sometimes a military unit will capture the imagination, and I think that is a way to describe what the Corps of Cadets from Virginia Military Institute did on May 15th, 1864, by taking a crucial role in the Confederate line, helping to fill the gap that had emerged in Breckinridge's center. Now, I don't say that to downplay what they did, or to say what they accomplished was only something that happened in the imagination. Far from it. And today we're going to talk a little bit about what the Corps of Cadets accomplished and how it was such an important role in the outcome of Newmarket. So don't worry, we are going to give the cadets the spotlight that they deserve. I'm Sarah K. Byerly with Gazette 66.5, and today we are talking about the Virginia Military Institute Corps of Cadets at the Battle of Newmarket on May 15th, 1864. Now, we left off last week's video by talking about fighting that occurred at the center and on the western side of Newmarket's battlefield. Now, we kind of didn't take it all the way and finish the story. I told you about the charge of the 34th Massachusetts. We started talking about the flanking attack attempted by the 51st Virginia, and I got us right to the point where Confederate General Breckinridge makes the decision to send in the cadets to fill a gap that has emerged in his battle line. And that's where we sort of cut it off. So what happened after John Breckinridge said, "Put in the boys, and may God forgive me for the order"? What happened? The Corps of Cadets had been stationed further back, behind the battle lines, mostly out of range of fire. When they receive the order, they begin moving from the plateau area, which is this flatter land area between the crest of Manners Hill and then before the land starts dipping down toward the Bushong farm buildings. So they have been in reserve there. When the orders come, they begin moving toward the Bushong farm, toward the fighting lines. And as they're starting down this very gentle slope headed toward those farm buildings, they come under artillery fire. And they will take casualties there, but they will continue on. They have their orders, they have their mission, and they must go forward. As the Corps of Cadets approaches the Bushong farm buildings, they split and go around the house. So 2 companies will go left, 2 companies go right. Once they get around those farm buildings, then they start rejoining again in the orchard, which sits just north of those farm buildings. Again, they take more casualties in this area, and they will take more losses as they move through the orchard toward the split rail fence that will mark their position in Breckinridge's line. It's while they're in the orchard or shortly after they arrive at the fence that their commander, Lieutenant Colonel Shipp, goes down wounded. He will recover from this injury, but he is effectively out of the fight and not in command during the battle. So command then goes to the tactical officers, and they are not cadets. Some of them had been cadets, so they were VMI alumni, some of them. A few of them had battle experience, and they would have been teaching military discipline and kind of acting as advisors to the cadets when they were back at the Institute. That is a nutshell way to understand who these tactical officers were and what their roles were. So they are going to be the ones commanding the 4 companies when they are on the line. Now, the cadets carried Austrian rifles. And these were guns that had been brought into the Confederacy by a blockade runner, and the superintendent of VMI had made special arrangements for these guns to be purchased and shipped to the school. So these were the guns that the boys trained with. Some of them may have had some target practice experience with them, but it is a lighter form of weapon than the Springfield or Enfield rifle, usually carried by Civil War infantry. When the cadets have rushed to their position, filling the gap in Breckinridge's line, stationing themselves along this fence, they begin loading and firing these Austrian rifles. And they probably were having difficulty seeing what they were firing at. Again, there seems to be heavy smoke hanging over the battlefield at this time. Could have been rain still continuing, and they may not have been able to see targets. Whether or not they could see units, men, soldiers that they were shooting at is perhaps beside the point. They were taking fire, and across the field from them was Captain von Kiesler's 5 Union artillery guns, which was also sending shot and shell toward their position. The tactical officers and the cadets started to realize that they could stay in this one position and get slaughtered and possibly forced to fall back, or maybe it was time to consider a different measure. And perhaps relying on the idea that the best defense may be an offense, they make a decision to charge into the field. Now, it's possible that they could have heard the sound of Confederate movement and the shouting that would have accompanied charges coming from other portions of the Confederate line. We know that the 51st Virginia Regiment and some of the other Virginia units in Wharton's brigade were pushing an attack on Bouchon Hill to take cannons there. So the cadets may have been aware of that. Possibly their officers may have been aware of a slacking of fire from von Kiesler's battery. That's something that I'm looking into with more detail, so I'm not going to elaborate it right now because I would not want to give wrong information. Whatever the exact circumstance, there is a moment when the tactical officers and the VMI cadets decide that they're going to get up and they're going to make a charge. It was not a decision made without knowledge. Remember that cadets had been under artillery fire when they came down Shirley's Hill earlier in the day. So these young men know what artillery fire, what rifle fire can do to a unit. And yet they make a decision to rise up, to climb over this fence and start moving into an open field. And there was a young cadet, he remembered that as he climbed on the fence, he felt like he was the biggest target in the world, and he was concerned that he was going to be shot as he was crossing the fence. Others recalled feeling that as they crossed the fence, ideas of individuality ceased. They were part of a unit, they were focused on a mission and a goal, and they were going to either conquer or die together. It's very much a spirit of the corps moment as they cross the fence and move into this field, probably still sheltered by the battle and cannon smoke, filling this area that would be called Field of Lost Shoes. Why Field of Lost Shoes? Because as the VMI cadets move across this area and the ground dips down, we're going to show you a video shot on the field in just a couple minutes. You'll be able to see it. The water had been pooling in this area, and it was probably, well, we know it was a plowed field at that time, so you have just saturated ground. It is a mud pit out there, and as the cadets run or attempt to run across it, the mud was so deep that their shoes were sinking into the mud, and as they moved to take their next step, their shoes were being pulled off their feet by this lovely suction from the mud. So, Field of Lost Shoes. You have cadets losing their shoes. They remember this, they record it in their later writings, but they keep running, they're running for those guns. They need to take the artillery position before the Union gunners can either figure out what's going on or rally enough to fire shots at this charging corps. They cross the field, and accounts say that in many ways they surprised the gunners, the gunners were starting to limber up to move out, so maybe they didn't surprise them completely, but the speed of the cadets' attack takes the gunners by surprise. They are not able to pull all of their cannons off the field, and there's accounts of the cadets running up and exchanging in hand-to-hand combat with these gunners who are attempting to hitch the horses to the cannons to pull the cannons off the field. And you have cadet swords in use, you have bayonets, and they are able to capture at least one Union gun. Von Kiesler abandons another cannon, so he leaves the field with 4 cannons when he should have had 6, and he has some explaining to do to his superior officers. But when the cadets are aware that they have captured this gun, their color bearer, who is named Oliver Evans, he climbs up on top of this captured Union gun, and he is waving the Virginia Military Institute standard, and it is just this idea, this scene that is imprinted in the minds of the cadets who witnessed it, officers and others who witnessed this scene, and it becomes a defining moment in Newmarket's history and how the battle is remembered. If you say Newmarket, most people are not going to think of Stahl's failed cavalry charge, or the 34th Massachusetts, or even the 51st Virginia and their attack on Vashon Hill. Now, if you say Newmarket, people think Virginia Military Institute Cadets, and there's nothing wrong with that. It is a wonderful part of the story, and a key part in Breckinridge's victory. So, with those thoughts, let's go ahead and look at some videos that I shot in 2018 when on Newmarket Battlefield, so you can have a greater appreciation of what these young men accomplished as they move from the fence through the open field and take a Union gun. I just have to say it. I think history is better than fiction. I know I've written historical fiction, that's another topic for a different day, but stories like this are so inspiring. There are other stories in history, of course, of young men, young people taking active roles and helping to change the tide of something, be it a battle, a social movement, a political movement, things like that. But at Newmarket is unique, and it is the only time in American history that a student body from a college or institute went and fought as a student body on a battlefield. And that's very unique. It's also very special what they accomplished for Breckinridge. The trust that he was forced to place in them was not misplaced. They hold a position for him, and then they are part of the Confederate charges that lead to a Confederate victory at Newmarket. Well, now I'm actually going to take a break from the soapbox and let you see some of the video footage. I'm standing here at the north edge of the Bushong Orchard. You can probably see the Bushong buildings toward the back of the trees there. We're looking south on the battlefield, and this is the VMI cadets would have come charging toward us, or toward this position that we're standing in. 2 companies went on one side of the Bushong house, the other 2 companies went on the other side. So they kind of split to go around the house, then reform as they come through this orchard. We're going to go ahead and turn slowly. You'll see the barn there in the background, Bushong barn. Keep coming around. Those tall trees there along this line would have been the Confederate line, and right about where we're standing is the gap that the VMI cadets help to fill. And here we are, you can now see the fence here at the north end of the Bushong Orchard, and now that big open field in front of us is what is now called Field of Lost Shoes. If you look really, really carefully, you might see a cannon sitting at the top of the little ridge there at the end of the field. That's going to be it represents one of the guns that the VMI cadets captured. So this is a look at their position. We'll go ahead and turn all the way around so you get the 360 of the area. There is Highway 81 cutting through the battlefield, and at the far end of this fence line is the marker for Woodson's Missourians, which we'll take a look at in a little bit. We're now standing in the middle of Field of Lost Shoes, facing north. This would be the direction the cadets would have been facing as they make their charge across this field. We're about halfway across the field, and notice that the cannon is not visible on that ridge line. It won't be visible until we get much closer. Over off to the left, would be, trees are there now. There wouldn't have been trees there then, but the river, Shenandoah River, is just on the other side there. And back to center. And a look toward Massanutten Mountain. Again, we're in the middle of Field of Lost Shoes, facing north toward what would have been the Union. We just crested the little rise out of Field of Lost Shoes. Again, moving north, we're going to go ahead and walk toward the cannon. Forgive us if it's a little jerky in the filming. We're going to do our very best here as we bring you right up to the cannon. This is walking speed. We thought running might be a little too jittery for filming. And here is the cannon. This is the view looking south from the Union lines overlooking Field of Lost Shoes. You'll notice if you look carefully, you can see the fence to the north of Bushong Orchard, and then it dips down into Field of Lost Shoes and then back up to that little rise. So you might be thinking, what was the cost for what the VMI cadets accomplished at Newmarket? 10 of the cadets would die, either instantaneously on the battlefield or as the result of injuries or illness suffered during the battle or campaign. A little over 50 were severely wounded enough that they reported their injuries. There were others who were injured, but just not to an extent that they showed up at a field hospital or approached their surgeons. So some of those who were wounded kind of went unrecorded in the official reports. So they would suffer approximately 25% losses in this battle. What do we learn from the advance, the fight, and then the charge of the VMI cadets at the Battle of Newmarket? I think that is a question that each of us is going to answer in a slightly different way. As we look at the history of what they did, and I've tried to give a brief overview of it today, perhaps I should have given more details, but I didn't want it to get too bogged down. I want to give you the gist of it, inspire you to learn more, read more, visit the battlefield. So as we learn history, facts, what really happened, I think that we end up drawing lessons from experiences in history. And I think that as we look at the experiences of the VMI cadets, there are lessons that can be learned. Lessons about courage, about leadership, about dedication to your comrades, about command decisions, about following through with decisions, about losing individuality and becoming part of a bigger group, a goal, a cause, something that suddenly matters beyond yourself. And I think personally one of the things that I've learned most as I've studied the Virginia Military Institute Cadets is the idea of selflessness. I would encourage you to think about how their story inspires you or what you learn from it, and send me an email. Write a reply in the comments. If you still want to learn more, you're not convinced by this video, you need more details, you want to know more about the individual cadets and what they did, there are resources out there, including my book on the Battle of Newmarket. We'll just toss it out there as a recommended resource from, of course, an unbiased author. Just kidding. But I would love to hear what the experience of the cadets at Newmarket and their history means to you. and I do mean that seriously. So send an email if you are on our email list, leave a comment here on YouTube or on the blog. And hopefully we've given you some things to think about. Hopefully we've left you a bit inspired. I know we've showed you some beautiful areas of the battlefield as it looks today, and hopefully given you some things to ponder and reconsider. I'm Sarah K. Byerly with Gazette 66.5. Thank you for watching. I hope you have an inspired day and week, and we'll be back next week to talk about the Union retreat, which was forced, in part, by the charge of the cadets at Newmarket. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.